Chuckleenic. I'm a reenactor. And for 36 years in the classroom, what I did was I used reenactment to bring history to life for my students. And to that end, I dress up for the time period in garb, not costumes, garb. And I would bring stuff in for the kids to handle. I'd have the music going for whatever time period and culture we were studying, and I'd try to immerse them in the era and make it become more real for them and make it have a bit more of an impact. Well, I'm not in the classroom anymore, so I'm repurposing myself because I have a whole bunch of garb at home, and I've got a passion for bringing the past to life, a desire to preserve landmarks because landmarks go away, and I like to play history detective. So my method of repurposing myself is to get a project going that I very pretentiously call my Mission Odyssey, where I will dress up in the garb and visit the sites associated with the mission era and past that in Alta California, and tell the stories of the missions, the Asistencias, those are spin-off missions, the Estancias, those are the ranchos, those are the ones that haven't been paved over, the presidios, those are the fortifications that were designed to protect the missions, and anything else which catches my fancy. Well, what I'm doing now is I am returning to Mission Santa Clara because I talk a lot and I have a lot of information. So I hope you stick with me on my journey. About 6 months after the founding of the mission, the Padres were not happy because an expedition with 14 settlers and their families arrived from Mexico, and they were to establish the first pueblo in Alta California, and that was going to be El Pueblo de San Jose de Guadalupe. And the Padres really did not look forward to this, but this was, the pueblo was to be set up to help raise food, which would ultimately be going to help support the Presidio in San Francisco. Of course, during the period where the mission and the pueblo were not really getting along, in 1779, a flood occurred which forced the mission to move, and a temporary chapel was built, and in the meantime a search was on for finding a new site, which was settled on 2 years later, so 1781. And this third site was going to be pretty much a long-term one for the mission. On November 9th, 1781, Padre Serra performed the ceremonial dedication of the cornerstone. In a cavity were placed a metal crucifix, Spanish coins, and medallions representing the Catholic Church and the Spanish Treasury, which funded the endeavor to convert Native Americans, and which also represented the Spanish Empire. 10 days later, the cornerstone was laid for the third mission church, anchoring a structure that was 40 varas by 9 varas, roughly 110 feet by 25 feet. And it would be completed by May of 1784. Unlike the previous two chapels, which had been made of logs, this third chapel was made of adobe. It was 100 feet long, like 22 feet wide, and it was designed by Padre Murguia, who unfortunately passed 4 days before the dedication ceremony. By the way, the dedication ceremony was not entirely solemn. You had soldados shooting their firearms into the air, and it was quite the spectacle. The third side of the mission which lasted from 1784 to 1819, is located near several Native American burial sites. This might have been a reason for selecting the site. The Padres, when establishing Asistencia Santa Gertrudis, built the Asistencia near a sacred Chumash site. The third site of the mission is marked out in various ways at the end of Franklin Street at the northeast corner of the university grounds. There's a large cross and historical marker plaque commemorating the site. The outlines of the quadrangle are marked out in this small park. The chapel itself has its outlines marked out by pavers in the cul-de-sac. Very little remains of the previous mission buildings aside from a few adobe walls and the old adobe women's club, which was one of several continuous rows of homes built in 1792 to 1800 as dwellings for the Indian families at Mission Santa Clara. And it's on the Alameda between Benton and Franklin Streets. Of course, flooding also affected the nearby Pueblo of San Jose. In 1791, they were forced to move, maybe just a mile south, but still. Floods tended to plague a lot of the settlements in Alta California. It took until about 1801 for the disputes to pretty much go away, because there was lots of squabbling between the settlers and the Padres over who had rights to what land and who had rights to what water. But by about 1801, things had calmed down a bit. By the way, the last vestige of El Pueblo de San Jose de Guadalupe is the Luis Maria Peralta adobe. It was believed to have been built before 1800 by Manuel Gonzalez, an Apache who was one of the Pueblo founders. It was later owned and occupied by Sergeant Peralta, Pueblo Comisionado, from 1807 to 1822, who came with the De Anza expedition to California. Padre de Catala came up with a solution as a way to bridge the gulf between the mission and the Pueblo. He ordered about 200 neophytes to build a road that would be about 4 miles long, and it would be lined with willow trees, and it would be that there would be irrigation ditches on either side, and this would be called the Alameda. And with the road in place, it's kind of like building bridges, right? The residents of the Pueblo on Sundays would often walk to hear Mass over at the Mission until 1803, when they finally built another church. So this is like going to be the first Catholic church that's not created by the Mission. So this would be St. Joseph's in San Jose. The irrigation ditches, which brought water from the Guadalupe River and Mission Creek to the fields and to feed a pond near the Mission, are long gone. The last of the willow trees has been removed, but here's the Alameda. In 1818, we get to move on to another chapel because a severe earthquake rocks the area. And this temporary chapel is actually made of adobe, and it's going to be in use for a number of years, but now the Padres are looking for site number 5, and that is where the current chapel or mission chapel is located today. Construction began on a permanent site, permanent compound, in 1822. This is going to be the fifth and final location of Mission Santa Clara. And the quadrangle's laid out, and there's workshops, and there's residences, and many of the things that would end up being placed within a quadrangle within a mission. And the chapel itself It's going to be like 100 feet long and 20 feet wide, 22 feet tall, and it would have walls that were like 4 feet wide at the bottom, and they would taper to 2 feet wide or 2 feet thick at the top. Of course, the missionaries at Santa Clara did not spend all of their time fleeing floodwaters and building churches, as common as that seemed. The over 1,200 neophytes were learning the rudiments of Christianity and receiving the sacraments of the church. They were also learning Spanish because the Spanish couldn't cope with the number of distinct Indian languages in the area. And I would imagine it was also an imperialist approach. There was also a renowned mission choir, and the Spanish tried to teach the Indians the skills necessary to become productive Spanish citizens. With an ample supply of water from nearby streams on the Guadalupe River, Mission Santa Clara harvested vast amounts of corn, barley, peas, garbanzo beans, and lentils. Herbs were also grown. Orchards of fruit and olive trees grew as well. However, the Padres placed an emphasis on growing wheat and eating its products, which was not something that native Californians did historically, and at Mission Santa Clara, their wheat crop was among the best of any mission. Harvests routinely outnumbered corn by 4 times or more. This was a fundamental shift from the traditional way of life of the native Californians on several levels. They had lived by hunting and gathering. Now they were tending crops. And European missionaries discouraged them from venturing outside the staple foods. The staple crops would tend to push out the native plants. In addition to focusing on non-native crops, the missions began to grow and store surplus product, and that was a European practice, not a native Californian one. In addition, cattle and sheep grazed on the mission's extensive lands. That meant training neophytes to become vaqueros, who were responsible for the herding of cattle at the mission ranches and would handle many of the cow and livestock-related tasks such as slaughtering the cattle, rendering tallow, and preserving hides so they could be made into leather. The mission had the second largest livestock herd among the northern missions. The produce of the mission helped to supply the neighboring Pueblo of San Jose and the Presidio of San Francisco, in addition to the mission community itself. Natural disasters did not prevent Mission Santa Clara from achieving great prosperity. After the Mexican War and end of Spanish trade restrictions, there was an increase in customers from Britain and the United States, which led to an increase in cattle production, but not for meat. It was for hides, often called California dollars or Yankee banknotes, as detailed in the book 2 years before the mast. Matanzas, where cattle were slaughtered, were the result of this production of hides in California missions. With large outlying ranches belonging to the missions, thousands of heads of cattle, as well as horses and sheep, provided steady source of income. The mass production of hides and tallow resulted in a grave of more than 1,700 cows. In 1997, while excavating for the parking structure next to the soccer fields, a matanza half the size of a football field was discovered. This mass grave for cattle is indicative of their use for hides, as the bones do not bear the marks of being slaughtered for food. In the 1800s, tallow from cattle was used as soap, and hides were used for everything from books to clothes to windows. The price of the various cattle byproducts on the market were between $500 and $1,000, so a mission with thousands of heads of cattle could make a large amount of money through ranching.
Yeah, I figured. Looks like I'm coming back to Mission Santa Clara. I hope you stick with me.